My information is that Archie and Lilibet were brought to Highgrove, where used napkins were allegedly collected for DNA testing. I am told the results were deeply unfavorable to Harry and Meghan and could raise serious questions about the succession.
Lady C has confirmed it. Last month at Highgrove House, Prince Archie and Princess Lilibet were taken into a private room. Not the drawing room, not the garden. A separate space prepared for one purpose. Napkins. Ordinary napkins the children touched without thinking. Staff collected them in 30 seconds. That material went for testing. Only after that brief interval were the children brought through to join King Charles and Queen Camilla. The information Lady C received indicates the results are not favorable for Meghan and Harry. There is now a real possibility that both children will be excluded from the line of succession. This is a very commendable action. It is Charles's final and extremely wise step before the close of his reign. Napkins. 30 seconds. Results that do not support the official story. And yet the meeting was not held at Buckingham Palace. It was not held at Clarence House. It was held at Highgrove. Why Highgrove? That question sits underneath everything that follows. The alleged DNA result may have been the immediate purpose. The location itself may have been the longer signal. The audience receives one revelation and is immediately given another reason to keep watching. The suspicions did not begin at Highgrove. They formed in stages, each one raising the stakes until the private room became the place where those stages allegedly met a test. Stage 1 created the first unease. During the pregnancies, the appearances never quite matched ordinary progression. The photographs were carefully managed. Claims of natural conception sat against absolute control of lighting, clothing, and angle. Moon bumps that seemed to shift between appearances, sudden transitions that left observers unsettled. The questions were still soft then, still confined to how the pregnancies looked, but the visual record already felt performed rather than lived. Suspicion was born in the gap between what was claimed and what the eye could actually see. Stage 2 deepened the unease and moved it from image to process. At the births, the questions shifted to paperwork, birth certificates that named Meghan as the mother, later amendments that removed personal names while leaving the title, arrangements that, according to long-standing commentary, did not invite independent verification. For Lilibet, the talk grew more specific and more concrete. Colorado, a surrogate private jet transfer to Montecito, NDAs signed by everyone present. Lady C has spoken of reliable information on that point. The certificate still carried the legal fiction required for succession. The circumstances of delivery remained outside ordinary public scrutiny. Suspicion was no longer only about photographs. It was about whether the official record matched the biological reality. Stage 3 made the mystery harder to ignore. Once the children were visible at all, the discussion moved to resemblance and privacy. No shared mouth, no shared hair, no shared eye shape or color that the eye could settle on, no shared nose, no shared skin tone, linking them clearly to the woman presented as their mother. Everyone who saw them remarked on the same absence. Meghan kept their faces largely hidden. Privacy was the official reason. Control was the practical one. The deeper suggestion, repeated for years across the commentary that follows these matters, was that open images would invite arithmetic she preferred to avoid. The children existed. The ordinary visual evidence of maternity did not. The gap had become public. Stage 4 changed the language itself. Lady C began calling them Harry's children. Neil Sean used the same phrase. Tom Bower did the same. It was not affectionate shorthand. It was a marker chosen with care. Neither child, she indicated in the careful terms she employs when the legal ground is thin, was a product of Meghan's DNA, or genetic makeup. The phrase Harry's children settled into the vocabulary of people who followed the story closely. Words that had once been speculative were now being selected with deliberate precision. The commentary had stopped treating the maternal claim as settled. Stage 5 was Highgrove. For the first time in the long narrative, years of suspicion allegedly collided with a physical test. Napkins. 30 seconds. material collected in a private room before the children were allowed to join the king. The information Lady C received is that the results do not favor the story that has been maintained. The staircase that began with uneasy photographs in 2019 and uneasy paperwork in 2021 reached its top step in 2026. Suspicion had become collection. Collection had become results. But the alleged result was not the strangest part of the meeting. The order in which Charles received his visitors was: Harry entered first. That single fact is the open loop that matters more than any discussion of succession rules. Why was Harry admitted alone? What could Charles have told him in those opening minutes? Did Harry understand why the children had been brought there? Was the collection of material discussed with him directly? Did he leave that private conversation knowing something the rest of the party did not? Lady C has described those initial minutes as the time required to cook Meghan's goose. If the information she has received is accurate, Harry was given the outline of what was about to occur while Meghan was still waiting outside the room. The private conversation between the king and his son becomes the hinge on which the entire visit turns. Before Harry entered that room, he was simply the son arranging or attending a meeting with his father. After he entered alone, he potentially became the only Sussex adult who knew what Charles intended before everyone else walked in. That changes the emotional meaning of everything that followed. The meeting is no longer only about verification. It is about who possessed information and who did not. And Meghan? She was still outside. Did she know? If she knew the purpose of the private room and the napkins, why did she agree to the meeting at all? If she did not know, when did she discover it? If Harry knew and she did not, what was going through his mind when she finally walked into the room with the children? Did he warn her? Or did he simply watch her enter a situation whose full shape she did not yet understand? The science of the test itself needs only a short explanation. Material collected from everyday contact can yield usable DNA. In some cases, maternal cells transferred during pregnancy remain detectable years later. A competent collection can speak to whether the woman named as mother carried the child. That is the technical core. Everything else is the human drama of knowledge and timing. The absence of photographs, the private setting, the controlled order of entry, all of it creates the space in which the question of who knew what becomes the real story. The audience is no longer only asking what the napkins revealed. They are asking what each adult understood at the moment those napkins were collected. Harry went in first. Meghan was still outside. 2 children touched ordinary household items. 30 seconds passed. The sequence itself is the drama. Meghan arrived from a carefully built California image of independence and control. She entered a royal setting with no cameras waiting outside, no controlled footage she could shape. No public entrance. Protocol applied. She had to curtsy to Camilla. Camilla was present throughout. Charles controlled the terms, the duration, and the absolute ban on images. The Sussexes left without a single public visual they could use. The woman who had spent years managing every frame of her own story was required to submit to a frame she did not choose. That is not a small detail. It is the visible collapse of the control she had maintained since leaving Britain. Before Highgrove, she supposedly possessed one permanent connection that could not easily be removed, the royal status of her children. After Highgrove, the story asks, for the first time with physical material in play, whether even that connection is secure. The power reversal is almost complete. The independent duchess who controlled the narrative is reduced to a petitioner who must observe protocol inside a house she does not choose and leave without a single image she can deploy. But even that does not explain why Charles chose Highgrove, why this particular royal property, rather than a London residence under the king's direct day-to-day control. Highgrove is not neutral ground. It is William's territory in all but name. The choice of location shifts the meeting from a private matter between Charles and his younger son into something that already touches the future reign. Charles is the present king. William represents what comes next. By holding the meeting on duchy ground, the institution placed the Sussex problem inside the landscape that William will one day manage. Meghan was not merely entering Charles's home. In the narrative that now surrounds the visit, she was stepping onto terrain tied to the brother Harry has spent years fighting. The symbolic weight is deliberate. The present king conducts the meeting. The future king's property frames it. The problem is already being positioned as one that belongs to the reign that follows. Highgrove was not background. It was part of the story. The delayed payoff lands here. The location was chosen because the unresolved question was never only Charles's to settle. It was already being prepared as William's inheritance. Charles is no longer simply the father who agreed to see his grandchildren. He is the king who chose the timing, the location, the order of entry, and the absolute secrecy. The larger interpretation begins to form only after all the pieces are in place. Perhaps the significance of the meeting is not merely what Charles allegedly wanted to know. Perhaps it is what he did not want William to inherit unresolved. Charles can still act while the meeting remains private, while material can still be collected without spectacle, and while the decision stays inside the family rather than inside a future constitutional argument. The timing is the act of a man who understands that some problems become harder once the crown has passed. He is settling an unfinished file so that the next king does not have to open it under greater public pressure and with less room for quiet resolution. Father, king, father of the future king. Man attempting to close a file before it becomes someone else's permanent problem. That is the arc. The consequences need to be stated only once, and each must be distinct. For the children, the change is status. If the maternal claim is not supported, their place in the succession becomes open to formal challenge and possible removal. The titles they hold and the public identity they have been given rest on a foundation now under examination. They remain Harry's children in the language that has been used for years. Whether they remain secure members of the succession is the point the napkins were collected to test. For Meghan, the change is leverage. The insurance policy that was meant to outlast personal unpopularity loses its force. The structural link that kept her attached to the institution weakens. The ability to speak of the children's royal status as a permanent fact becomes harder to maintain. The California operation continues, but the residual claim on the monarchy that the children provided is no longer reliable. For Harry, the change is knowledge and position. He remains the son who entered the room first. If he understood the purpose before the children were brought through, he becomes the parent who allowed the test to occur. His standing with the institution is already diminished. The status of his children affects how much further that standing can fall or recover. The private minutes with his father may have altered the balance inside his own marriage as much as they altered the formal status of the children. For William, the change is inheritance. He receives a cleaner file. The location of the meeting already placed the problem inside the landscape he will one day control. If the results lead to formal clarification or exclusion, the reign he conducts begins with fewer unresolved questions about the Sussex branch. The estrangement with his brother continues, but the institutional complications attached to the next generation are reduced. What happens formally after the alleged result? That question remains open. The public still does not know what process follows a finding that does not support the maternal claim. The institution has rules. Those rules have not yet been seen in motion. The gap between collection and consequence is the next silence the story must eventually fill. The napkins remain the center of the story. Their meaning evolves as the narrative advances. At the beginning, they were mysterious. An ordinary object in a private room, the kind of everyday item a child touches without thinking. In the middle, they became evidence. The physical point where years of suspicion met an alleged test, the 30-second collection that turned commentary into material. Near the end, they become a symbol of lost control and a possible turning point for the next reign. The quiet mechanism by which an unfinished file may finally be closed before it is handed on. Return to the private room. Return to 30 seconds. Return to the napkins. The most important unanswered question is no longer simply what was allegedly found. It is who knew what was happening inside Highgrove before those napkins were ever collected. Harry went in first. Meghan was still outside. 2 children touched ordinary napkins. 30 seconds passed. Everything that followed, the controlled meeting, the absence of photographs, the choice of William's territory, the quiet departure without a single usable image, serves the same purpose. The institution tested a claim that had been allowed to stand for years. The king, who will not be present for the next reign, has taken the step that may clear the path for the king who will. The open questions that remain are the ones that matter now. What exactly did Harry learn in the minutes before the children entered? What did Meghan understand when she stepped into the room? Did Harry warn her, or did he simply watch the sequence unfold? What formal process follows a result that does not support the maternal claim? And how cleanly will William's reign begin once the present king has finished the work of verification? The napkins were not incidental. They were the point. The private room was not background. It was the stage. The order of entry was not protocol. It was the hinge. Highgrove was not a convenient location. It was the signal that the problem already belonged to the reign that follows. Charles acted while he still could. Harry entered knowing more than the others, or at least knowing first. Meghan entered a room whose full purpose she may not have grasped until the sequence was already underway. The children provided the material. The institution took what it needed. The public is left with the silence that always follows when the most important minutes of a royal meeting are the ones no camera records and no statement describes. That silence is where the story now sits. The napkins have done their work. The questions they leave behind are the ones that will determine what the next chapter actually contains.